Welcome to another deep dive, with me today.
Yeah.
This time we are going into
Yeah.
an issue of JFK Lancer magazine from 1996.
Wow.
It's incredible. This magazine is packed with just amazing research articles,
Yeah.
letters to the editor,
Interesting.
and even a confession from a guy who claims to have fired the fatal shot.
Oh, wow.
So
Love it.
that'll be interesting to talk about. Let's jump right in with this article by George Michael Ivica.
Okay.
He takes a really unique look at Jim Garrison, the New Orleans DA who went after a conspiracy case.
Right.
And what's so cool about this article is that Ivica actually knew Garrison.
Personally.
Yeah, personally. So he's not just like, commenting on some historical figure.
Right.
He's sharing insights about like a friend.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Ivica points out, the similarities between the real Garrison and the one that Kevin Costner plays in JFK.
Interesting.
They're both seen as like these charismatic figures with a really strong sense of justice, but they also faced a ton of criticism for their methods.
Makes sense.
So, both Garrisons were accused of like relying too much on unreliable informants, and even like there were whispers of homophobia in their investigations.
Oh, wow.
But get this.
What?
Ivica says that the Warren Commission, the official body that investigated the assassination,
Right.
they also looked into potential gay links to Oswald and Ruby.
Wow. I never knew that.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
So it really shows you that both sides were digging deep, looking for any possible connection, no matter how controversial.
You know what I think is so interesting about this whole thing is that, decades later, we're still seeing these wildly different interpretations of the assassination.
That's true.
And I think that's why it's so important to go back to these primary sources, to see what people were thinking and talking about at the time.
Exactly.
So it's a direct line to the research community back then.
Absolutely. All right, so let's move on to this article by Jack White.
Okay.
He focuses on the backyard photos of Oswald holding the rifle, right? The infamous ones.
Yes, and he really gets into forensic document analysis,
Interesting.
looking for any little inconsistency that could unravel the official story.
Oh, I see. So he's looking for those tiny details that might point to something bigger.
Exactly. So he examines the police testimony about those photos,
Okay.
and he finds a major contradiction.
Really? What is it?
So Detective Stovall, who found the photos in Oswald's rooming house, he said he found them on a Saturday.
Okay.
But Captain Will Fritz, who interrogated Oswald,
Right.
he said that he showed Oswald an enlargement of the photos before they were officially found.
Hold on, that doesn't make sense.
I know, right? It throws the whole timeline into question.
Yeah, it does.
And it raises some serious doubts about the authenticity of those photos.
Yeah, like if Fritz had the photos before they were officially logged into evidence,
It could mean...
it could mean that they were planting evidence or tampering with it to frame Oswald.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah, that's a huge implication.
It's not just about some photos. It's about the integrity of the entire investigation.
Exactly.
So this tiny little detail could point to a much larger cover-up.
It's amazing how these small things can have such a big impact.
I know. All right, are you ready for this?
What?
Now we're getting into the James Files confession.
Okay, the big one.
This is where the magazine throws a real curveball.
Interesting.
So Files claims that he was the one who fired the fatal shot that killed JFK.
Wow.
Whether you believe him or not, his story is wild.
What does he say?
Okay, so he claims that he was recruited by the CIA and had ties to the Chicago mob.
Wow.
He talks about his military background, his expertise in firearms,
Okay.
and his role in this whole assassination plot.
It sounds like something out of a movie.
It really does, and here's the thing.
What?
Files' confession directly links back to that missing piece in Garrison's investigation.
You mean the potential role of organized crime working with the government?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Files says that organized crime was like the junior partner to U.S. intelligence.
Oh.
So he gives this very detailed account of the plot.
What kind of details?
He talks about the weapons they used to the escape routes.
Yeah.
Even claims to have had Secret Service credentials.
That's incredible.
It is, whether it's true or not, it just adds fuel to the fire for people who believe there was a conspiracy.
Yeah, it definitely makes you think.
It really does.
Does?
It just shows you that even with a confession, the full truth might still be out there somewhere.
Right.
And it leaves us with this question. Can we ever really know for sure what happened that day in Dallas?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's one that we'll keep exploring as we go deeper into this issue of JFK Lancer.
I can't wait. So we've talked about like personal accounts and motives, right? But
Right.
this magazine also zooms out to the bigger political picture surrounding the assassination.
Yeah.
There's this article by Jim Hargrove called,
Stranger in a Strange Land.
yeah, Stranger in a Strange Land, Kennedy in the Maelstrom.
Mm-hmm.
And it really puts Kennedy in the middle of all these political storms. You know,
It does, he was shaking things up with his Cuba policy, his stance on Vietnam, even clashing with the intelligence community.
you're talking about like his plans to pull out of Vietnam, right?
That was a huge deal.
I bet.
Hargrove talks about how there was this fierce debate about whether Kennedy was actually serious about withdrawing.
Some people thought he was just saying it, but not really meaning it.
Right, but others, even Robert McNamara, insisted that he was absolutely going to end U.S. involvement after the '64 election.
Wow, think about that. Like, ending that war would have changed everything.
It would have impacted military spending, international relations, the whole landscape.
And don't forget the people who are profiting from the war.
Yeah, they wouldn't have been happy.
Not at all. So Hargrove goes even further and looks at Kennedy's economic policies.
Right.
He mentions this book called Battling Wall Street
Oh, yeah?
that argues that Kennedy's actions were seen as a direct threat to the financial elite.
Makes sense. He was closing tax havens, raising taxes on the wealthy.
Yeah, not exactly making friends of the most powerful people.
No, not at all.
So now we're seeing potential conflicts not just with the CIA, but also with the military and Wall Street.
Right. It starts to make you think that maybe the lone gunman theory isn't the whole story.
It really does. This article makes you look at the bigger picture.
It does. When you see Kennedy challenging the status quo on so many fronts, it's hard to ignore the possibility that he made some powerful enemies.
Enemies who might have benefited from his death.
Exactly.
Okay, so beyond the articles, this magazine also has letters to the editor.
Oh, yeah, those can be really interesting.
They show the raw emotions and personal stakes involved in this research.
It's like you can feel the passion and the dedication.
Absolutely. There's this letter from Lyon H. Garrison, Jim Garrison's son.
Oh, wow.
And he's furious about this article in the Times-Picayune that accused his father of paying witnesses in the Clay Shaw case.
That's heavy.
He just dismantles the accusations point by point.
It's amazing how these letters show the human side of the research.
It is, it reminds us that this isn't just some abstract historical debate.
Right.
It's about real people fighting for truth and accountability.
Exactly, even decades later.
And these diverse voices make the research process even more fascinating.
It's true. It's not just a dry historical account. It's a community.
Of researchers.
Yeah, like a whole community.
Debating, challenging assumptions, trying to piece together this puzzle.
Right. And it's not just Americans either. There are contributions from international researchers, too.
Oh, really? Like who?
There's this guy, Ian Griggs. He's the secretary of Dealey Plaza UK.
Dealey Plaza UK.
Yeah, it's a British research group.
Wow, that's cool.
So Griggs talks about this bloodstain expert, Sherry Pula Gutierrez.
Okay.
And she presented her findings on the JFK assassination in this really unique way.
How?
She treated the audience like a jury, presenting evidence clearly and avoiding all the technical jargon.
Oh, wow. So she made it really accessible for everyone.
Exactly. And her conclusion, based on the blood spatter, is that the fatal headshot came from the front right, which contradicts the single bullet theory.
Exactly. It just goes to show that experts in different fields are still contributing to this investigation.
And that new evidence and interpretations can still emerge even after all these years.
Right. There's also this piece called Our Guest Speaker, where this researcher, James P. Sawa, shares his personal journey into the world of JFK research.
Interesting.
It's really relatable. He talks about how his family's fascination with the Kennedys sparked his own interest.
It's like a family affair.
It is. And he talks about how he just devoured books on the assassination, trying to understand what happened.
Yeah.
And he makes this really important point.
What's that?
He says that it's not enough to just figure out who did it and how.
Right.
He says we need to understand the why, the motivations, the forces at play.
Yeah, the bigger picture.
Exactly. And he talks about how the assassination is still relevant today,
Like we're still living with the consequences.
Exactly.
That's a powerful thought.
It is. All right, let's shift gears a bit and talk about Richard Bissell.
Oh, the CIA guy.
Yeah, he was a prominent CIA official during the Kennedy administration.
Yeah.
And there's this article that really delves into his life and career.
Interesting.
He's described as like this brilliant but controversial figure.
I can see that.
He was deeply involved in some of the CIA's most covert operations.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was like a strategic mastermind,
It's fascinating how these guys operate in the shadows.
It is.
So what kind of operations was Bissell involved in?
Well, the article talks about his role in the Bay of Pigs invasion.
Right, that was a disaster.
It was. And he was also involved in various plots to assassinate Castro.
Wow, so he was in the thick of it.
He was, and it's interesting, he seemed to struggle with the ethical complexities of his work.
Like he was a patriot defending American interests.
But he was also engaged in activities that were morally questionable.
A lot of gray areas.
Exactly. And he later admitted that recruiting mafia hitmen to kill Castro was a huge mistake.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a decision that haunted him.
Makes sense. It shows the slippery slope of these covert operations.
Right, the unintended consequences.
It makes you think about transparency and accountability,
Yeah, like how much can we expect from intelligence agencies? And how do we balance national security with the public's right to know?
It's a tough question.
It is, and it's one that the JFK assassination forces us to confront.
Okay, so this issue also has an interview with Gaten Fonzi.
Who was that?
He was an investigator for the House Select Committee on Assassinations.
Oh, wow. So he was on the inside.
He was, and the interview covers a lot of ground,
What kind of stuff does he talk about?
Well, he shares his experiences, his frustrations, his determination to find the truth.
Makes sense.
And he even talks about his interactions with key figures like Arlen Specter.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he remembers confronting Specter about the inconsistencies in the single bullet theory.
Remember that whole jacket bunching up explanation?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Fonzi challenged Specter on that, pointing out the discrepancies between the bullet hole in Kennedy's shirt and the autopsy report.
And what did Specter say?
Well, this time he said he couldn't recall the details.
So from the jacket bunched up to I can't recall.
Right. It's not very convincing.
No, it's not. And it's these inconsistencies and evasive responses that fuel the skepticism.
They do.
So what else does Fonzi talk about?
Well, he also talks about the HSCA's focus on the mafia's potential role.
Interesting.
He admits that he was skeptical at first.
But then he started to see the connections.
Exactly. He said he couldn't ignore them.
It's a reminder that we should always be open to new information.
Absolutely. Even if it challenges our assumptions.
Right.
Fonzi also talks about the challenges of investigating something as complex and controversial as the JFK assassination.
I bet it wasn't easy.
He said he met people who seemed more interested in protecting certain narratives than finding the truth.
That's frustrating.
It is, and it shows that this wasn't just some detached historical inquiry.
Right? There were real stakes involved.
Exactly.
So did Fonzi uncover anything significant?
Well, he talks about Sylvia Odio.
Who's that?
She was a Cuban exile who claimed to have met Oswald in Dallas just weeks before the assassination.
Really?
Yeah, and her testimony could have been huge,
How so?
It linked Oswald to other people who might have been involved in the conspiracy.
No.
Fonzi believed her, and he spent a lot of time trying to corroborate her story.
Did it lead anywhere?
Unfortunately, Odio was never allowed to testify publicly.
Oh, wow.
Fonzi was really upset about that. He thought her testimony could have changed everything.
That's a shame.
It is. It makes you think about how political considerations can sometimes get in the way of the truth.
Especially in a case like this.
Right. But despite all the setbacks, Fonzi never gave up.
That's admirable.
It is. He encourages everyone to keep searching, to keep asking questions.
That's what we're doing here.
We are. And, his dedication is really inspiring.
It is, and his message resonates with anyone who's ever questioned the official story.
Absolutely. It's amazing how each article, each letter adds like another piece to this huge puzzle.
It really is. It's like we keep peeling back these layers of history.
And sometimes those layers lead to the most unexpected places.
Right. Like this article about Jack Ruby and this incident with a ton of money.
What happened?
So it seems that Ruby owed a lot in back taxes, and he withdrew a bunch of cash to supposedly pay it off.
Okay.
But there are some suspicious details about the whole thing.
Like what?
Well, first of all, Ruby had just given his tax lawyer power of attorney.
So he didn't need to handle the payment himself.
Exactly. So why withdraw all that cash and carry it around?
Yeah, that's weird. It seems risky, especially for someone who was already under scrutiny.
Right. And the article suggests that maybe he was carrying all that money to create an alibi.
Oh, wow. Like if he needed to prove he was somewhere else.
Exactly. It's like straight out of a movie.
It is. This magazine is full of twists and turns.
It really is, and it just shows you how much we still don't know about what happened.
It does. Speaking of which, this issue also revisits the single bullet theory.
Ah, that old chestnut.
Remember Specter and his jacket bunching up explanation?
Oh, yeah?
Well, Fonzi, the HSCA investigator, remembers another conversation he had with Specter about it.
What happened? Did Specter change his story?
Well, Fonzi pressed him on the discrepancies between the bullet hole in Kennedy's shirt and the autopsy report.
Yeah.
Specter said he couldn't recall the specifics.
Wow, so from the jacket bunched up to I can't recall.
Not exactly convincing, is it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
And it's those kinds of inconsistencies that keep people digging.
It's true. It's a testament to the dedication of these researchers.
Yeah, they just want to get to the bottom of it.
They do. This issue also has some analysis of recently declassified documents about the Bay of Pigs.
Interesting.
And these documents are pretty damning. They criticize the CIA's handling of the operation.
What do they say?
They accuse the CIA of poor, planning a chaotic command structure, and even misleading Kennedy about the chances of success.
Wow, that's serious. And it puts Richard Bissell right in the hot seat.
It does. It adds another layer to his role in all of this.
It does. You know, it's interesting how the Bay of Pigs keeps coming up in connection with the assassination.
Do you think there's a direct link?
It's possible. I mean, the Bay of Pigs was a huge embarrassment for Kennedy and the CIA.
Right?
Maybe some people in the government saw him as weak after that.
And that created a climate for something like this to happen.
It's not impossible. It all comes back to motive.
Who stood to gain from Kennedy's death?
Exactly. And that brings us back to the big question, will we ever really know what happened in Dallas?
I don't know.
Yeah.
After this deep dive, I feel like we're closer to the truth and further away than ever before.
I know what I mean. Every piece of information just makes the puzzle more complex.
It's like we're seeing all these different perspectives.
The passion of the researchers, the conflicting testimonies, the hidden motives.
It's overwhelming.
It is. But it's also a reminder that history is messy.
It is. It's not a simple story.
And that's what makes the search for truth so fascinating.
So what now? Where do we go from here?
Well, I think the most important thing is to keep thinking critically.
Don't just accept the official story.
Exactly. Question everything, explore different perspectives, do your own research.
And there's so much information out there.
There is books, documentaries, archives, online forums.
So keep digging, keep asking questions, keep the conversation going.
Exactly. Because the truth is out there somewhere.
Maybe one day a new piece of evidence will surface and we'll finally have the answers.
We can only hope. But until then, the search continues.
It does. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening. We hope you found it insightful.
Absolutely.